The storm outside was relentless, pounding against the old wooden house like 1,000 fists. Inside, only a single lamp cast a fragile pool of golden light in the kitchen. The air felt heavy, as if holding its breath. Ethan Carter stood frozen near the counter, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Across from him, Maggie Bennett, his mother-in-law, stood with her back to the door, one hand gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Neither of them spoke, but their ragged breaths filled the silence, louder than the howling wind outside. Ethan's heart thudded so violently in his chest he thought Maggie could hear it. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his. There was something in them, sorrow, longing, and a question neither of them dared to voice. When her fingers brushed against his wrist, it wasn't planned. It wasn't even deliberate. It was just a touch, light, fleeting, like the whisper of a secret you weren't supposed to hear. But for Ethan, it felt like fire. Ethan, her voice broke, barely more than a whisper. We can't. The rest of her words were lost to the storm, swallowed whole by the crack of thunder. And in that suspended moment, with rain lashing the windows and guilt swirling between them, Ethan knew nothing would ever be the same. This is Midnight Confession. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deeply moving true stories. Your support helps us bring you tales that speak to the quiet corners of the human soul. The storm had begun hours earlier, just as Lila, Ethan's wife, packed her bags for a quick trip out of town to visit a friend. Ethan had stayed behind, offering to help Maggie with some repairs around the house. At first, it seemed harmless. Maggie was kind, practical, the sort of woman who managed to keep everything in order despite living alone in this aging farmhouse on the edge of town. But as the evenings stretched on, the air between them had shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. A shared laugh here, a lingering glance there. Moments so small they could have been ignored, if not for the way Ethan's pulse quickened each time her hand brushed past his. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself she was just his wife's mother, a woman who had given him a place to stay when he and Lila couldn't afford their own apartment. And yet, here he was, standing in a pool of lamplight, watching rain slide down the windowpane like tears, while the one person he should never feel this way about stood just a breath away. 2 weeks earlier, before the storm, before the late-night whispers and trembling hands, Ethan Carter had been just another young man trying to make his marriage work. The dusty road stretched endlessly before them as Ethan steered his old pickup truck down the narrow highway leading into the small Montana town of Willow Creek. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. Beside him, Lila sat cross-legged in the passenger seat, humming softly to a song only she seemed to hear. Lila Bennett, now Lila Carter, had always been the bright star of her family. College graduate, full of dreams, a girl who had grown up in this very town but moved away to chase a bigger life. She had a laugh that filled every room and a way of speaking that made people lean in, wanting to be part of her world. Ethan glanced at her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. He loved her with a depth that scared him sometimes. But love didn't pay rent, and lately, their marriage had felt like a house built on shifting sand. "Are you sure about this, Lil?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. "About moving back in with your mom? Even just for a while?" Lila shrugged, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's not forever. Just until we can save up enough to get back on our feet. Mom's house has plenty of room, and she actually offered. Besides," she added with a teasing glance, "you always said you liked her cooking." Ethan managed a laugh, though it felt tight in his throat. "I do. It's just, I don't want to feel like I'm intruding. Or like I'm failing you." Lila reached over, squeezing his hand. Her touch was warm, reassuring, but it didn't quite erase the knot of unease in his chest. "You're not failing me, Ethan. This is just a chapter, that's all. Things will get better." The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. As they rounded the final bend, the Bennett farmhouse came into view, a sprawling weather-worn house surrounded by fields of golden grass swaying in the evening breeze. A place that seemed suspended in time, both comforting and haunting. Maggie Bennett stood on the front porch, arms crossed lightly over her chest as she watched the truck rumble up the driveway. From a distance, She looked like a woman untouched by time. Strong shoulders, dark hair streaked with silver, and an expression that carried equal parts warmth and caution. When Ethan stepped out, carrying their single battered suitcase, she smiled in welcome. It wasn't a wide smile, but there was something undeniably kind in it. And something else too. A flicker of curiosity, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Lila, sweetheart," Maggie said, wrapping her daughter in a hug that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. "And Ethan." She turned to him, her voice softer now. "I'm glad you're here. Both of you." Ethan returned the smile, though his palms were damp. "Thank you for letting us stay, Mrs. Bennet." "It's Maggie," she corrected gently. "Your family now." The words should have been simple. Comforting even. But when she said them, her gaze lingered on him just a heartbeat too long, like the brief pause of a breath before a confession never spoken aloud. Inside, the house smelled of baked bread and polished wood. The kitchen gleamed under warm light, while the living room held worn furniture that spoke of years of use and countless memories. Ethan set their suitcase down in the small guest room, trying to ignore the sense of being watched. Not in a menacing way, more like a quiet awareness. Every time Maggie passed by the doorway, he felt it, the subtle shift in the air, like a thread connecting them, too fragile to name. Later, over dinner, conversation flowed easily enough. Maggie asked about their life in the city, about Ethan's job search, about Lila's plans. She listened closely, nodding, smiling at all the right moments. But there were times, fleeting, delicate, when Ethan would glance up to find her already looking at him. And in those silent exchanges, something unspoken bloomed, as dangerous and undeniable as the storm clouds gathering far beyond the hills. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. The house was still and quiet, wrapped in the soft, bluish light of early morning. Beside him, Lila slept soundly, her breathing steady and deep. Ethan lay there for a moment, listening to the distant rustle of wind through the fields, before slipping out of bed and dressing quietly so he wouldn't wake her. When he stepped into the hallway, he noticed a warm glow coming from the kitchen. The faint aroma of coffee and butter drifted through the air, pulling him forward. Maggie was already awake, standing at the stove in a soft gray sweater and faded jeans. She moved with easy grace, as though she'd been awake for hours, her hands busy as she stirred something in a cast-iron pan. She didn't notice him at first. Ethan paused in the doorway, suddenly unsure whether to announce himself or retreat back to the bedroom. But then Maggie glanced over her shoulder and caught sight of him, her lips curving into a small, surprised smile. "Morning," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. "You're up early." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a little embarrassed at having been caught watching her. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd maybe help out with chores or something." Maggie tilted her head, amused. "Well, that's mighty thoughtful of you, but I've been managing this place on my own for years. Sit down. I'll pour you some coffee." The kitchen was warm and inviting, the kind of place that felt like the heart of the house. Ethan sat at the small wooden table, his fingers curled around the mug Maggie handed him. Their fingertips brushed as she passed it to him, a brief, almost imperceptible touch, but it sent a strange flicker of heat up his arm. He told himself it was nothing, just a simple accident. "Thank you," he murmured. Maggie turned back to the stove, her voice light and casual. "Lila used to sit at that exact spot when she was little. She'd keep me company while I cooked breakfast before school." Ethan smiled, picturing a younger version of his wife sitting where he sat now, swinging her legs and chattering away. She must have been a handful. Maggie laughed softly. The sound was warm, rich, the kind of laugh that wrapped around a person and stayed with them. She had her moments. "She's always had a big personality, my Lila." For a brief moment, her laughter faded into something more wistful. Ethan caught it, the subtle shift in her expression, like a shadow passing over the sun, and found himself wondering how often Maggie felt this quiet loneliness when the house was empty. As the morning wore on, Lila eventually drifted into the kitchen, yawning and rubbing her eyes. She greeted them both with a sleepy kiss on Ethan's cheek and a quick hug for her mother. The three of them ate breakfast together, but Ethan couldn't shake the lingering memory of the earlier moment, the warmth of Maggie's fingers against his, the way her eyes had softened when she spoke of the past. It wasn't inappropriate, he told himself firmly. It was just human. A natural closeness born from living under the same roof. Nothing more. Over the next few days, Ethan settled into a quiet routine. He helped Maggie with repairs around the house, fixing a loose hinge, clearing out the gutters, chopping firewood. Maggie insisted he didn't need to, but Ethan couldn't sit still while she worked alone. Whenever they were together, the conversation flowed easily. Maggie had a dry wit and a calm strength that Ethan admired. She seemed to understand him in ways Lila sometimes didn't, listening without judgment, offering small pieces of advice that somehow always felt right. And yet, beneath the simplicity of their interactions, there was an undercurrent Ethan couldn't ignore. It was there in the way Maggie would occasionally reach past him in the narrow hallway, her arm brushing his chest. It was there when their eyes met over the dinner table, holding for just a second too long. It was there when she smiled at something he said, her gaze lingering as though she wanted to say more. Ethan told himself he was imagining it, that it was nothing. But each night, as he lay beside Lila and stared up at the ceiling, he couldn't quiet the memory of Maggie's laughter echoing softly in the back of his mind, or the way his pulse quickened whenever she stood just a little too close. The days slipped by in a quiet rhythm, each one blending into the next. From the outside, life in the Bennett farmhouse seemed peaceful, almost idyllic. But beneath that calm surface, small cracks had begun to form. It started with little things, moments so fleeting they might have been dismissed if not for the way they seemed to echo in Ethan's mind long after they'd passed. One evening, after dinner, Lila excused herself to take a long bath. Ethan stayed behind to help Maggie clear the table. They moved around each other in the warm glow of the kitchen, the air scented with rosemary and baked bread. At one point, Ethan reached past Maggie to grab a stack of plates, and his hand brushed hers. The touch was accidental, quick, light, nothing more than skin against skin for the briefest second. But when he looked up, Maggie was already looking at him. Her expression was unreadable, her breath caught ever so slightly. Ethan froze, the world narrowing to the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Thanks for the help," Maggie said finally, her voice steady, though there was a subtle tremor beneath it. "You didn't have to stay." "I wanted to," Ethan replied before he could think better of it. His voice came out low, almost rough. "You do so much around here. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in it." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Maggie gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, turning back to the sink. Later that night, Lila climbed into bed beside Ethan, her damp hair brushing his shoulder. She curled up against him, humming softly as she scrolled through her phone. "Mom seemed quiet tonight," she said casually. "Do you think she's okay?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah. I think she's just tired." But the truth was more complicated. He had noticed it too. The subtle changes in Maggie's mood, the way her laughter didn't come quite as easily as before, the way her gaze lingered on him a moment longer than it should. He turned onto his side, wrapping an arm around Lila, and tried to push those thoughts away. "You worry too much, Lil," he murmured into her hair. "Everything's fine." The following morning, tension began to show in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. He and Maggie were in the barn, sorting through a stack of old tools. The space smelled of hay and dust, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, until Maggie bent to pick up a heavy box and staggered slightly. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and caught her by the waist, steadying her. The moment should have been innocent, a simple act of care. But when Maggie straightened, she didn't immediately step back. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, her breath quickening as she met his gaze. Ethan felt the heat of her body, the rapid thud of his heart, the stillness of the barn around them. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yes," Maggie whispered, though her voice sounded unsteady. "Thank you." They stood like that for a beat too long before Maggie finally stepped away, her face flushed. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself, guilt knotting tight in his stomach. That evening, Lila's eyes narrowed as she watched Ethan from across the dinner table. It wasn't anything he said or did, Just the way he seemed distracted, his attention flickering toward her mother more often than usual. "Ethan," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Is everything okay? You've been, I don't know, different lately." Ethan blinked, startled. "Different how?" "I don't know." Lila shrugged, though her tone was sharper now. "Distant, maybe. Like your mind's somewhere else." He forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "I've just been tired, that's all. Trying to figure out work, the move. It's a lot." Lila studied him for a long moment before finally nodding, but the doubt in her eyes remained, unspoken yet unmistakable. Later that night, as Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls of the house were closing in around him. Everything felt precarious, like a delicate thread stretched too tight, ready to snap at the slightest pull. And somewhere deep down, beneath all his attempts to deny it, Ethan knew that whatever was happening between him and Maggie was no longer something he could ignore. The first snow of the season arrived that weekend, soft and silent, blanketing the farm in white. By morning, the world outside the Bennett farmhouse seemed transformed, pure, untouched, almost sacred. Inside, however, the atmosphere was far from serene. Lila bustled around the kitchen, rushing to pack her overnight bag. She had been planning a weekend trip with her childhood friend Hannah to visit some college classmates in a nearby town. "You sure you'll be okay here without me?" she asked Ethan, glancing over her shoulder as she stuffed clothes into her duffel bag. "I hate leaving you right when we're still settling in." Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, forcing a reassuring smile. "We'll be fine. It's just for 2 nights, Lil. Go have fun. You deserve a break." Maggie, sitting at the table peeling apples for a pie, looked up and added, "We'll manage just fine. You don't need to worry about us." Lila gave her mother a grateful smile, then kissed Ethan quickly before heading out the door. The sound of her car crunching over the snow-covered driveway faded into silence, leaving the house unusually still. For the first time since Ethan and Lila had moved in, it was just him and Maggie. The realization sat heavily between them, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. Maggie busied herself in the kitchen, humming softly as she worked. Ethan offered to help, but she waved him off, insisting he relax. Still, he lingered nearby, unable to shake the magnetic pull he felt toward her. Every glance, every brief touch of hands while passing a dish, carried a weight that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been there, now brought into sharp focus by Lila's absence. That evening, the snowstorm intensified. Wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling the windows. The power flickered once, twice, before finally going out altogether, plunging the rooms into darkness. "Great," Maggie muttered, lighting a candle. "Of all nights for this to happen." Ethan chuckled softly, though his heart was pounding. "Guess we'll have to make do with old-fashioned lighting." They gathered in the living room, sitting close to the fire for warmth. Maggie draped a thick quilt over both their shoulders, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar and lavender. At first, they talked about harmless things, the weather, old memories of Lila's childhood, plans for the farm come spring. But gradually, the conversation shifted, becoming quieter, more personal. "It's strange," Maggie said after a long pause, her gaze fixed on the fire. "Having someone else in the house again. I'd gotten so used to it just being me." Ethan hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you like having us here?" "Really?" Maggie's lips curved in a bittersweet smile. "More than you know. It's been lonely these past few years. This house is so big, and sometimes it feels like it's full of echoes." Her voice caught slightly, and Ethan's chest tightened. Without thinking, he reached over and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but her fingers curled around his like they had been waiting for it all along. The air between them shifted. Maggie turned to him, eyes shimmering in the firelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the logs and the wild wind outside. "Ethan," she whispered, his name breaking like a secret on her tongue. "We shouldn't." "I know," he murmured, though he didn't let go of her hand. "God, Maggie, I know." Their faces were close now, close enough for Ethan to feel her breath against his lips. Every rational thought screamed at him to pull back, to remember Lila, to remember why he was here. But the storm outside felt mirrored by the storm inside him, fierce and impossible to contain. When Maggie finally leaned in, their lips met in a soft, trembling kiss. It wasn't the kind of kiss Ethan had imagined, not wild or fevered, but fragile, tentative, like two people teetering on the edge of something dangerous. When they broke apart, Maggie pressed her forehead to his chest, her breath shaky. "We can't do this," she said, though her hands clung to him like she couldn't bear to let go. "Ethan, it's wrong." Ethan closed his eyes, his throat tight. "I know it's wrong, but I can't. I can't stop feeling this way." Maggie shuddered, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. "Neither can I." Later, when they finally pulled apart and Maggie retreated to her bedroom, Ethan sat alone by the dying fire. His heart was racing, his lips still tingling from her kiss, his mind spinning with guilt and longing. Upstairs, he heard the faint sound of a door closing. The distance between them now felt both too small and impossibly vast. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering every trace of the world beneath it, as if trying to hide the truth of what had just happened. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world wrapped in a quiet, pristine blanket of white. The farmhouse, with its snow-covered roof and smoking chimney, looked almost idyllic, like a scene from a postcard. Inside, however, the air was thick and suffocating. Ethan barely slept. He had spent most of the night pacing in his room, his mind replaying the kiss over and over until it was burned into his memory. Every detail haunted him. The way Maggie's breath had trembled, the softness of her lips, the quiet desperation in her voice when she whispered his name. By dawn, his guilt had settled like a stone in his stomach. Downstairs, Maggie was already awake. Ethan found her at the sink, her hair still slightly damp from a quick shower, her movements tense and deliberate. She didn't look up when he entered, but he caught the subtle tightening of her shoulders. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, her voice clipped. For a moment, there was only the sound of running water and the distant ticking of the old wall clock. Ethan wanted to say something, to apologize, to explain, but the words tangled in his throat. He knew no apology would be enough, and no explanation would undo what they'd done. The crunch of tires on snow broke the heavy silence. Maggie froze, her hands stilling on the dish she was drying. Ethan's pulse spiked as he rushed to the window. A car was pulling into the driveway. "Lila," Maggie breathed, her voice barely audible. "She's back early." Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't supposed to be back until tonight. "Maybe the roads cleared faster than she expected," Maggie said, her tone strained. "We need to just act normal." But normal felt impossible. Lila burst through the front door moments later, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, a wide smile lighting up her face. "Surprise!" she laughed, shaking snow from her boots. "The roads were way better than we thought, so Hannah and I cut the trip short." Ethan forced a smile, stepping forward to hug her. "Glad you made it back safe." Maggie's smile was more measured, her arms wrapping briefly around her daughter before she turned back to the sink. "We were just finishing up breakfast," she said, her voice perfectly even. "I'll make you a plate." Lila didn't seem to notice the tension coiled beneath Maggie's calm facade. She chattered about her trip, the funny stories Hannah told, the little cafe they'd stumbled upon in town. But Ethan barely heard her. He was hyper-aware of every glance Maggie didn't send his way, every inch of space she kept between them. To anyone else, it might have seemed normal. To Ethan, it felt like a carefully constructed wall. Later, when Lila was upstairs unpacking, Ethan found Maggie alone in the pantry, her hands gripping the edge of a shelf as if steadying herself. "Maggie," he said softly, stepping closer. "We need to talk." She shook her head sharply, her eyes closing. "No, Ethan. We need to forget last night. Completely. It was a mistake." "Was it?" His voice was low, raw. "Because it didn't feel like a mistake to me." Her eyes flew open, wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "Don't say that. Please." "I can't just pretend it didn't happen," Ethan whispered, his hand brushing against hers before she pulled away. "I know it's wrong. God, I know. But you felt it too." Maggie's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might crumble, Then she straightened, her expression hardening. "It doesn't matter what I felt," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "Lila is my daughter. You are her husband. That's the only truth that matters." Ethan's chest ached at her words, but before he could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Maggie stepped back, putting space between them just as Lila appeared in the doorway, holding a bundle of laundry. "What are you two whispering about?" Lila asked with a playful smile. Maggie forced a laugh. "Just planning dinner." Ethan turned away, hiding the turmoil etched across his face. Dinner that night was torture. Lila was cheerful, animated, talking about her plans for the upcoming week. Maggie nodded and smiled at all the right moments, her voice perfectly calm. Ethan played his part too, laughing when expected, answering questions when asked. But beneath the table, his hands were clenched into fists. Every brush of Maggie's arm against his, every stolen glance they didn't mean to share, felt like a secret threatening to spill into the open. After Lila went to bed, Ethan lingered by the back door, staring out at the moonlit snow. The cold seeped through the glass, sharp and bracing, but it wasn't enough to clear his head. Behind him, Maggie appeared quietly, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice almost breaking, "we can't keep living like this." If Lila ever suspected. He turned to face her, his heart aching. "I know. But what do we do? Pretend we're strangers? Pretend that night never happened?" Tears glimmered in Maggie's eyes as she shook her head. "We don't have a choice." For a long, painful moment, they just stood there, two people bound by guilt, longing, and a love they couldn't admit. Outside, the snow gleamed under the pale light of the moon, silent and cold, as if it too bore witness to their secret. The days following Lila's return were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The snow outside began to melt in patches, revealing muddy streaks along the driveway. But inside the farmhouse, a different kind of thaw was taking place, subtle, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Lila noticed it first in the smallest ways. The way Maggie sometimes paused mid-sentence, as though she'd lost her train of thought. The way Ethan's laughter seemed a touch too forced, his smile a fraction too tight when he looked her in the eye. At first, she brushed it off. Everyone was still adjusting to the move, to living under one roof, to the biting Montana winter. But as the days passed, those tiny inconsistencies began to pile up like snowdrifts, and Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something beneath the surface wasn't quite right. One evening, while Maggie was out feeding the chickens, Lila sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table. "You've been quiet lately," she said, studying him closely. "Everything okay?" Ethan forced a smile, the same practiced one he'd been wearing for days. "Yeah. Just tired, I guess. The storm threw me off a bit." "You're sure that's all?" He nodded, avoiding her gaze as he fiddled with a fork on the table. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Lila leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know, for someone who claims to be fine, you've been awfully distant." Ethan's chest tightened, panic rising in his throat. "I'm not distant," he said quickly. "I just have a lot on my mind." Lila tilted her head, her expression softening slightly. "You can talk to me, you know. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Her sincerity cut through him like a blade. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess, to lay bare the guilt that was consuming him. But then he saw Maggie through the window, her figure silhouetted against the fading twilight as she carried a lantern back toward the house. And the words died in his throat. "It's nothing, Lil," he whispered. "Really?" That night, Lila lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling while Ethan pretended to sleep. Her mind replayed their conversation over and over, each detail sharper than the last. She couldn't pinpoint why, but something in his tone had been off. A part of her wanted to believe his reassurances. Another part, quieter, darker, whispered that there was more to the story than he was admitting. The next day, Lila joined Maggie in the barn, hoping that work might clear her head. Maggie, usually chatty and warm, was unusually quiet as they mucked out stalls and fed the horses. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "Mom, is everything okay? You've been acting different." Maggie stiffened, her hand faltering on the shovel. "Different how?" "I don't know," Lila admitted, shrugging. You just seem distracted. Like your mind's somewhere else. Maggie forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. It's just the winter blues, sweetheart. Long nights, short days, it gets to everyone. Lila studied her for a moment longer, unconvinced, but let it go. At least out loud. Inside, however, unease was beginning to take root. That evening, while setting the table for dinner, Lila caught a fleeting moment between Ethan and Maggie. It was nothing overt, just a glance exchanged across the room. But it wasn't the kind of glance a son-in-law should share with his wife's mother. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Lila felt it like a physical blow. Her breath caught, her hands tightening around the silverware. When Ethan noticed her looking, he immediately turned away, his face flushed. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone casual but her pulse racing. "Yeah," Ethan said too quickly. "Just hungry." Maggie kept her back turned, focusing intently on stirring the pot of stew. That night, Lila found herself standing by the window long after everyone else had gone to bed. The moonlight cast silver patterns across the snow, but she barely saw it. Instead, she replayed the moment over and over, searching for another explanation. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe she was overthinking. But deep down, a gnawing certainty had begun to form, one she didn't want to acknowledge. Something was happening between Ethan and her mother. Over the next few days, Lila began to watch more closely. She noticed how Ethan always seemed to leave the room just before Maggie entered. How Maggie avoided sitting too close to him at meals, as if the distance might erase whatever lay between them. Individually, these actions might have meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture Lila didn't want to see. On the fourth night, Lila woke to find Ethan's side of the bed empty. Panic surged through her as she slipped from the covers and padded down the hall. She paused at the top of the stairs, straining to hear over the creaks of the old house. Voices, low, urgent, drifted up from the kitchen. "This has to stop," Maggie was saying, her voice tight with emotion. "Lila's going to notice. She already suspects something." Ethan's reply was softer, desperate. "I know. But I can't just turn it off, Maggie. I can't pretend last night didn't happen." Lila's breath caught so sharply she had to clap a hand over her mouth to stifle it. "Last night." The words reverberated in her skull, each one a hammer blow. Her knees went weak as realization crashed over her. They weren't talking about some trivial disagreement. They weren't talking about chores or family matters. They were talking about betrayal. About her. About them. Lila stumbled back from the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her vision blurred with tears, and for a moment she had to grip the railing to keep from collapsing. Downstairs, their voices continued, muffled, indistinct, but she couldn't bear to listen anymore. In that single, shattering moment, her world had cracked apart like ice on a thawing river. Lila didn't sleep that night. She spent the dark, endless hours sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands twisted tightly in her lap as silent tears streaked her cheeks. Downstairs, the house was quiet, but every creak of the old floorboards sounded like an echo of their voices, taunting her, reminding her of what she'd heard. Last night. 2 simple words, and yet they had destroyed everything she thought she knew about her life. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains, Lila's eyes were swollen and raw. She wiped her face quickly as Ethan stirred beside her, pretending to wake naturally. "Hey," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "You're up early." Lila forced a weak smile. "Couldn't sleep. Storm keep you up?" Something like that. Her voice cracked, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. He stretched, kissed her forehead, and rolled out of bed as if nothing were wrong, as if her heart hadn't been ripped out just hours earlier. Lila watched him go, her chest tightening with a mixture of rage and despair. Breakfast was torture. Maggie stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a steady hand. Ethan sat at the table, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. To anyone else, it would have looked like an ordinary morning. To Lila, it felt like a stage play, every movement rehearsed, every smile fake, every word a carefully chosen lie. "You didn't get much sleep either," Maggie said lightly, glancing at her daughter. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Lila said quickly, forcing a bite of pancake past the lump in her throat. Ethan reached for her hand across the table. "You sure? You've been so quiet lately." Lila froze at his touch, bile rising in her throat. She wanted to yank her hand away, to scream at him, to demand the truth. Instead, she smiled, a brittle, hollow thing, and squeezed his hand back. "I'm just tired," she lied. "That's all." For the rest of the day, Lila played her role to perfection. She laughed when expected, helped Maggie with chores, even kissed Ethan on the cheek when he returned from chopping wood. But inside, her thoughts churned like a storm. Every glance between Ethan and Maggie was now sharp, loaded, unmistakable. She saw things she hadn't before. The way Maggie's voice softened when she spoke to Ethan, the subtle way Ethan's shoulders straightened when Maggie entered the room. It was all there, plain as day. And Lila hated herself for not seeing it sooner. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Lila crept downstairs. She stood in the darkened kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, struggling to steady her breath. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. She wanted to confront them, to drag the truth into the open and watch their perfect little lies crumble to dust. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. "If I just explode," she whispered to herself, "they'll deny it. They'll make me feel crazy." No, she needed to be smart. She needed proof. And so, with trembling hands, Lila began to form a plan. The next day, she started small. She lingered in doorways, listening for scraps of conversation. She watched their body language carefully, noting every flicker of guilt, every too long pause. When Ethan said he needed to run into town for supplies, Lila volunteered to go instead, leaving him alone with Maggie. When she returned unexpectedly early, she caught them sitting far too close at the kitchen table, their hands suspiciously close to touching. "Oh!" Maggie exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "You're back already?" "Yeah," Lila said evenly, setting down the grocery bag. Roads were clear. Ethan's smile was too quick, too practiced. "Everything okay, Lil?" "Just fine." But inside, her suspicions solidified into certainty. That evening, Lila set a small recorder beneath the edge of the couch in the living room. Her hands shook as she pressed the button, but her resolve was steel. If they were going to keep lying, she would force the truth into the light. 2 days later, when Maggie went into town for feed and Ethan stepped outside to split wood, Lila retrieved the recorder and played it back. At first, there was nothing but silence, the occasional creak of floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then voices. Ethan's, low and strained. "I can't stand this, Maggie." Pretending in front of her, like nothing's happened. Maggie's, choked and tearful. "I know. But what choice do we have? If she finds out, it'll destroy everything." Ethan. "I don't care. I can't keep lying to her face." Maggie. "You have to. We both do." Lila stopped the recording, her hands trembling violently. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the room seemed to tilt around her. It was worse than she imagined. Worse because now she had proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, that her husband and her mother had betrayed her. Tears blurred her vision, but beneath the grief burned something sharper, colder. Rage. That night at dinner, Lila smiled brighter than ever before. She laughed at Ethan's jokes, complimented Maggie's cooking, kissed her husband goodnight with a tenderness that made his eyes soften in guilt. Neither of them suspected a thing. But inside, Lila was no longer just hurt. She was planning. She would bide her time. She would wait until the perfect moment. And when it came, she would tear their carefully built world apart, piece by piece. The following days passed in a blur of false smiles and carefully measured words. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Bennett farmhouse seemed warm and ordinary, a family weathering the long Montana winter together. But beneath that fragile illusion, a storm was brewing, one that was far more dangerous than any snowstorm they had ever faced. Lila carried her secret like a shard of glass buried deep in her chest. Every moment with Ethan and Maggie was excruciating, but she played her part flawlessly. She laughed at Ethan's jokes. She helped Maggie with chores. She even reached for Ethan's hand at dinner, smiling sweetly as if nothing had changed. Neither of them suspected a thing. But inside, Lila's grief had hardened into something colder. She was no longer simply a heartbroken daughter and wife. She was a woman on a mission to destroy the web of lies they had spun around her. One morning, while Ethan was out chopping wood and Maggie was upstairs folding laundry, Lila slipped into the pantry. From beneath a stack of old linens, she pulled out the small recorder she'd used to capture their voices. Her hands trembled as she played the clip again, letting their words wash over her like acid. Ethan's voice strained and raw. "I can't stand this, Maggie." Pretending in front of her, like nothing's happened. Maggie, broken and tearful, "I know. But what choice do we have? If she finds out, it'll destroy everything." "Ethan, I don't care. I can't keep lying to her face." Lila stopped the recording, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The proof was there, undeniable. And soon she would use it. That evening, Lila began laying her trap. While Maggie cooked dinner, Lila drifted around the kitchen, casually asking questions designed to make her mother uneasy. "Mom, you seem tired lately," she said, her tone innocent. "Are you sure you're sleeping okay?" Maggie's hands faltered for the briefest moment as she stirred the pot of stew. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just winter catching up to me." Lila nodded, her smile never wavering. "You've been spending a lot of time with Ethan during the day. I'm glad you two get along so well." The spoon clattered against the side of the pot. We manage," Maggie said carefully, not meeting Lila's eyes. Lila's smile widened, though her heart thundered in her chest. "It means a lot to me, you know. Families sticking together." Maggie forced a thin laugh, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the spoon. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrent between them, came in from outside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Smells amazing in here," he said warmly, leaning down to kiss Lila's cheek. Lila turned her face slightly at the last moment, so his lips grazed her skin rather than landing fully. "Thanks," she murmured, keeping her tone neutral. Ethan didn't notice, but Maggie did. Her eyes flicked between them, troubled, suspicious. After dinner, Lila offered to wash the dishes alone. "You two go rest," she said sweetly. "I've got this." The moment they left the room, her pleasant mask slipped. She stood over the sink, gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles ached. Soon, she promised herself. Soon I'll make them pay. Upstairs, Ethan and Maggie spoke in hushed tones. "She's been different lately," Maggie said, pacing near the window. "Do you think she knows?" Ethan shook his head, though his voice wavered. "No. She's just tired. The move's been hard on her." Maggie stopped pacing, turning to face him with wide, fearful eyes. "You don't see it, Ethan. The way she looks at us. She's watching, even when you think she's not." Ethan sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "You're imagining things." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his chest. The next morning, Lila set the stage for her plan. "I'm going into town today," she announced over breakfast, smiling brightly. "I need to pick up a few things." Ethan frowned. "I can come with you." "No," Lila said quickly. "You stay here. Keep Mom company." Her tone was light, but the words landed like a stone. Both Ethan and Maggie froze for a fraction of a second, a reaction so brief it might have been missed, but Lila caught it. "Perfect," she thought coldly. "Just what I wanted." Instead of driving into town, Lila parked her car a short distance down the road and walked back through the snow, staying out of sight. From a hidden spot near the barn, she watched the house, her breath fogging in the cold air. Inside, she saw Ethan and Maggie move through the kitchen, their gestures tense, their expressions troubled. Even without hearing their words, Lila could sense the intimacy, the secret they were desperately trying to hide. Her stomach churned with fury, but she stayed silent, gathering every piece of evidence she could. By the time she finally returned to the farmhouse, she had rehearsed her performance to perfection. She burst through the door, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms full of grocery bags she didn't actually need. "Phew. Roads are slippery today," she said cheerfully. "Miss me?" Ethan smiled with relief. "Of course we did." Maggie, however, seemed tense, her eyes darting nervously between her daughter and Ethan. Lila set down the bags, her smile never faltering. Good. Because tomorrow night, she said, her tone light and casual, I want to have a special dinner. Just the three of us. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's the occasion? Oh, nothing big, Lila said smoothly. I just thought it would be nice to celebrate family. Maggie's breath caught audibly, but she didn't speak. That night, as she lay in bed beside Ethan, Lila stared into the darkness, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would strike. Tomorrow, she would rip away their lies and watch the truth spill out. And when it did, there would be no going back. The morning of the planned dinner dawned quiet and cold, the sky pale and heavy with the promise of more snow. Inside the Bennett farmhouse, the air was thick with an unspoken tension, like a storm about to break. Lila moved through the kitchen with calm precision, chopping vegetables, seasoning meat, and setting the table as if preparing for a celebration. But beneath her composed exterior, her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing with rage and anticipation. Tonight would end it all. The lies. The betrayals. Everything. Ethan noticed her unusually bright mood as he came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots. Ethan, you're up early. Looks like you've been busy. Lila turned, giving him a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lila just wanted everything to be perfect for tonight. He stepped closer, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The gesture, once tender, now felt like poison. Ethan, you didn't have to go to all this trouble. Lila's breath caught for the briefest moment, her pulse leaping at the familiar touch. Then she forced herself to step back, her tone airy and casual. Lila, I wanted to. Family deserves to be celebrated. The words were laced with double meaning, but Ethan, oblivious, simply smiled. Upstairs, Maggie stood before her mirror, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She looked pale, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. Why does this feel like walking into a trap? She thought, her chest tightening. But she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was being paranoid. Still, as she descended the stairs and saw Lila arranging the last of the dishes on the table, Maggie's unease deepened. Maggie, everything looks beautiful, sweetheart. Lila turned, beaming at her mother. Lila, thanks, Mom. I wanted tonight to be unforgettable. The words sent a shiver racing down Maggie's spine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them gathered around the table. Candlelight flickered softly, casting long shadows on the walls. To an outsider, it might have looked like the perfect family dinner. But beneath the surface, invisible currents swirled. Guilt, suspicion, anger, all colliding beneath the fragile veneer of civility. Lila raised her glass, her voice sweet and steady. Lila, to family. Ethan and Maggie echoed her, though Maggie's hand shook so badly her wine nearly spilled. They drank, and for a brief moment there was silence. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Lila kept the conversation light, asking about the farm, the weather, even sharing a funny story about a neighbor in town. Her laughter rang clear and bright, almost too bright. Ethan seemed relaxed, relieved even, as though he believed the worst of the winter's tension was finally behind them. But Maggie sat stiffly, her fork untouched, her eyes darting between her daughter and Ethan like a trapped bird searching for escape. Halfway through the meal, Lila set down her glass and folded her hands on the table. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Too calm. Lila, I've been thinking a lot lately about honesty. About how the people we love most are the ones we should never lie to. Ethan's brow furrowed. Ethan, Lila, what's this about? She smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. Lila, it's about truth. And how sometimes, truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. Maggie's breath caught audibly. Her wine glass tipped slightly, red liquid spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Maggie, Lila. Lila, don't. The single word, sharp and commanding, froze Maggie in place. Lila reached into her pocket and drew out the small recorder she'd been hiding for days. She set it gently on the table between them. Lila, I went for a walk a few nights ago. I couldn't sleep. The house was so quiet, except it wasn't, was it? Ethan's face paled. Ethan, Lila, don't bother lying. Her thumb pressed the play button. The recorder crackled to life, filling the room with damning voices. Ethan's voice desperate, "I can't stand this, Maggie." Pretending in front of her, like nothing's happened. Maggie tearful, "I know. But what choice do we have? If she finds out, it'll destroy everything." Ethan, "I don't care. I can't keep lying to her face." The recording ended, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Ethan sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning. Maggie's hands flew to her face, sobs breaking free. Lila rose slowly, her chair scraping back across the floor. "Lila, you sat there night after night, smiling at me. You let me believe we were a family when all along." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to go on. "Lila, you betrayed me. Both of you." Ethan finally found his voice, raw and pleading. "Ethan, Lila, please. It's not what you think." She laughed, a sound sharp as broken glass. "Lila, not what I think. I heard you, Ethan. I heard you both." Her gaze swung to her mother, eyes blazing with hurt. "Lila, how could you, Mom? After everything Dad did to you, after everything we went through." Maggie reached for her, tears streaming down her face. "Maggie, sweetheart, I never meant to hurt you. I was so lonely. And Ethan." "Lila, don't you dare use loneliness as an excuse." Her words sliced through the air like a blade, silencing Maggie's sobs. Ethan stood, his face ashen. "Ethan, Lila, I love you. I always have. What happened between your mother and me? It was a mistake. A terrible mistake." Lila's chest heaved, anger and grief warring inside her. "Lila, a mistake." She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Lila, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Ethan. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was a choice. Every time you touched her, every time you lied to me, you chose this." Ethan flinched as if struck. Maggie collapsed into her chair, trembling. "Maggie, please, Lila. Don't leave us like this. We can fix it, we can." "Lila, fix it." Her laugh was hollow, chilling. "Lila, you can't fix what's broken beyond repair." She turned toward the door, her movements swift and decisive. "Ethan, where are you going?" "Lila, somewhere you'll never find me." As she reached for her coat, Ethan rushed forward, grabbing her arm. His grip was firm, desperate. "Ethan, Lila, don't go. Please." She looked down at his hand on her sleeve, then up into his eyes. For a fleeting second, a memory surged of their early days together, when love had been pure and simple. Then she wrenched her arm free. "Lila, don't you ever touch me again." The door slammed behind her, leaving Ethan and Maggie in a stunned, echoing silence. Outside, the snow fell harder, swallowing Lila's footprints almost as quickly as she made them. Inside, two people sat at a table meant for a celebration, surrounded by the wreckage of a family destroyed by secrets. And for the first time, they understood what it meant to be truly alone. The icy wind tore at Lila's coat as she stumbled through the snow, her breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. Behind her, the farmhouse loomed like a dark silhouette against the white horizon, a place that had once been her sanctuary, now a hollow monument to betrayal. Each step she took away from it felt both liberating and excruciating, like tearing a piece of herself free. The night was so quiet that every crunch of snow beneath her boots sounded deafening. The cold bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. Pain was easier to bear than the hurricane of emotions raging inside her. By the time she reached her car, Lila's hands were numb. She fumbled with the keys, her vision blurring as tears froze on her cheeks. Sliding into the driver's seat, she gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. For a moment, she just sat there, trembling, staring into the darkness. Her reflection stared back at her in the rearview mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, unrecognizable. "Who am I now?" she thought bitterly. "Who am I without them?" The engine roared to life, startling her. Lila drove with no clear destination, the road ahead illuminated only by her headlights and the faint glow of distant farmhouses. Her mind replayed the confrontation again and again. Ethan's desperate pleas, Maggie's tear-streaked face, her own voice cracking as she hurled words she could never take back. No matter how far she drove, she couldn't escape it. Hours later, she found herself pulling into a small roadside motel on the outskirts of a nearby town. The sign buzzed weakly in the cold night air. Vacancy. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. A weary-looking clerk barely glanced at her as she paid cash for a room. Once inside, Lila locked the door, dropped her bag, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time since leaving the farmhouse, she allowed herself to sob. Great, racking sobs that left her chest aching and her throat raw. She cried for the girl she used to be, for the mother she thought she knew, for the man she had loved so completely. And when there were no tears left, she lay staring at the ceiling, hollow and exhausted. The following morning, Lila woke to pale sunlight filtering through thin curtains. Her body felt heavy, as if she'd aged years overnight. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small, dingy room. It wasn't much, a chipped dresser, a flickering TV, a threadbare blanket, but it was hers. For now, it was safe. Lila's first instinct was to call someone, anyone. But as she scrolled through her contacts, she realized how isolated she'd become. So many of her friends had drifted away over the years. Her closest confidant had been Ethan. And now, her thumb hovered over a name she hadn't spoken to in years, Hannah Whitman, her childhood best friend. With a trembling breath, she pressed call. Hannah's voice, groggy but warm. Hello. Lila, Hannah? It's me. Lila. A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. Hannah, Lila. Oh my God. It's been forever. Are you okay? The simple question nearly broke her. Her throat tightened, tears welling. Lila, no. I'm not. Hannah didn't press for details. She simply said, tell me where you are, her tone firm and steady. An hour later, Hannah arrived at the motel, arms full of coffee and pastries. When she saw Lila, she dropped everything and pulled her into a fierce hug. For the first time since the truth had shattered her world, Lila felt a small measure of comfort. Over steaming cups of coffee, Lila told Hannah everything, her voice halting at first, then gaining strength as the dam finally broke. Hannah listened without interrupting, her face shifting between shock, anger, and sorrow. When Lila finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Hannah, Lila, I don't even know what to say. I knew things had been rocky with Ethan, but this? With your mom. Lila, it feels like some kind of nightmare I can't wake up from. Hannah, you're awake now. And you got out. That's what matters. Lila shook her head, staring down at her trembling hands. Lila, but I left everything behind, Hannah. My home. My marriage. Her voice broke. My family. Hannah reached across the table, taking Lila's hands in her own. Hannah, listen to me. Family isn't always the people you're born to, or even the ones you marry. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everything falls apart. Her grip tightened. Hannah, I'm here. You're not alone, Lila. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope stirred in Lila's chest. It wasn't much. Just a tiny, fragile spark. But it was enough to keep her from sinking completely into darkness. Later that afternoon, Hannah helped Lila find a small rental cabin on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just one room and a wood stove, but it was warm and private. As they unpacked a few essentials, Hannah glanced at her with a soft smile. Hannah, this is a new beginning. It doesn't have to be forever, but it's a start. Lila swallowed hard, emotion clogging her throat. Lila, thank you. For everything. Hannah, you don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Lila, what's that? Hannah, promise me you won't go back there. Not unless you're ready. That night, as Lila sat by the wood stove, staring into the flickering flames, she whispered the promise aloud to herself. Lila, I won't go back. Not like this. The words felt both terrifying and empowering. For the first time since her world had shattered, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing, however distant it might seem. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, Lila wrapped herself in a blanket and closed her eyes, holding on to that fragile spark of hope. She had survived the firestorm. Now she would learn to rebuild, one fragile step at a time. The farmhouse was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence that used to fill its rooms during quiet winter mornings, but a heavy, suffocating stillness that seemed to seep into the walls and floorboards. Maggie sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The once cheerful tablecloth was still stained with the deep crimson of spilled wine, a ghostly reminder of the night everything shattered. Upstairs, Ethan's footsteps creaked across the floorboards, restless and uneven. Neither of them had slept since Lila stormed out. When Ethan finally came downstairs, he looked like a man hollowed out by grief. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. Maggie lifted her gaze to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maggie, did you call her?" Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. "Ethan, she won't answer. I've tried a dozen times. Maggie, maybe we should go after her," try to explain. Ethan slammed his hand against the table, making Maggie flinch. "Ethan, explain what, Maggie? That we betrayed her? That we lied to her every single day?" His voice cracked, raw with anguish. "Ethan, there's no explanation that could make this right." Maggie pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears slipping free. "Maggie, I never wanted this to happen, Ethan. I never wanted to hurt her." Ethan turned on her, his face twisted with fury and regret. "Ethan, but you did. We both did. And now she's gone and He broke off, his voice shattering. "Ethan, I don't even know if she's safe." The truth hung between them like a curse. Neither could bring themselves to say what they were both thinking, that Lila might never come back. Maggie rose unsteadily and crossed to the window. Snow fell in soft, relentless drifts outside, blanketing the world in white. Somewhere out there, her daughter was alone, heartbroken and hurting, and Maggie was powerless to help her. Maggie whispering, "She's my little girl, Ethan. My baby. I was supposed to protect her, and instead." Her voice broke, and she sank into a chair sobbing. Ethan stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. His chest ached with a mix of rage, guilt, and fear so intense he could barely breathe. That afternoon, Ethan went to the barn and threw himself into physical labor, chopping wood until his muscles screamed in protest. Sweat and snow mixed on his skin, but no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't drown out the memory of Lila's face as she looked at him that night, eyes filled with a kind of pain he'd never seen before. The sound of her voice haunted him. Her final words replayed endlessly in his mind. "Don't you ever touch me again." Inside the house, Maggie busied herself with chores that didn't need doing. She scrubbed the same countertop 3 times, folded and refolded towels, rearranged the pantry shelves until they were perfect. Anything to keep from thinking. But when she passed Lila's old room, she froze. The door was ajar, the bed neatly made, the dresser still holding little trinkets and keepsakes from Lila's childhood. It was as if her daughter might walk back in at any moment, except she wouldn't. Maggie stepped inside and sank to her knees beside the bed, clutching Lila's worn quilt. Maggie whispering, "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Her sobs filled the empty room. That evening, Ethan and Maggie sat together in the living room, though neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Ethan, we can't keep pretending everything's normal." Maggie stared into the flames, her face pale and drawn. "Maggie, I know. Ethan, if we don't face what we did, it's going to destroy us." Maggie's hands twisted in her lap. "Maggie, it already has." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Ethan, I can't lose her, Maggie. I can't." His voice cracked, thick with emotion. "Ethan, she was the best thing that ever happened to me. And now she hates me." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Maggie, I don't think she hates you, Ethan. She's just hurt. And hurt people don't always know how to love, not right away." "Ethan, and what about you?" Maggie blinked, startled. "Ethan, do you hate me?" She shook her head slowly. "Maggie, I don't hate you. But I hate what we became." The fire popped loudly, making them both jump. For a long time neither spoke. Finally, Maggie whispered what they both knew but hadn't dared to say. "Maggie, even if Lila comes back, nothing will ever be the same. Ethan closed his eyes, the truth of her words slicing through him like a blade. Ethan, I know. The next morning, Ethan drove into town under the pretense of buying supplies. But in truth, he was searching, checking every motel, every cafe, every side street, hoping for a glimpse of Lila. At a small diner, he questioned the waitress, showing her a photo. Ethan, have you seen her? She's about ya, high dark hair, green eyes. The waitress shook her head, sympathy in her gaze. Waitress, sorry, haven't seen her. Ethan thanked her and left, shoulders slumping. With each failed attempt, the reality sank deeper. Lila didn't want to be found. Not yet. Back at the cabin on the edge of town, Lila stood by the window, watching the snow fall. She didn't know Ethan was out there searching for her. Didn't know Maggie spent nights sobbing into her quilt. All she knew was that she wasn't ready to go back. Not until she figured out who she was without them. Meanwhile, the farmhouse grew quieter, colder, emptier. Ethan and Maggie moved through it like ghosts, each lost in their own private hell. The home that had once been full of laughter and warmth now felt like a mausoleum, a place where love had died, leaving only echoes of what might have been. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew the same terrible truth. Even if Lila returned, some wounds could never fully heal. The night felt endless. Rain lashed against the windows of the small cabin, and every gust of wind seemed to shake its fragile walls. Emma sat at the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands. Her breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as she tried to hold herself together. Across the room, Ethan paced like a caged animal, his hands running through his damp hair. You can't keep running away from this, Emma said finally, her voice breaking. We need to talk about what happened. Ethan froze. His chest rose and fell quickly, his shoulders tense. He turned to her, his eyes full of a pain she had never seen before. What do you want me to say, Emma? His voice cracked. That I regret it? That I wish it never happened. Her throat tightened. Do you? The question hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan crossed the room slowly, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. When he stood before her, he knelt down, taking her trembling hands in his. His touch was warm despite the cold, and she felt her heartbeat stutter at the closeness. No, he whispered. I don't regret it. Not for a second. But it scares the hell out of me. Emma's tears spilled over. She clutched his hands tightly, desperate, terrified. Then why does it feel like you're pulling away from me? Because I'm trying to protect you, Ethan said, his voice rough. Emma, if anyone finds out about us, it won't just hurt us. It'll destroy everything. You know what people will say, what they'll do. I couldn't live with myself if I ruined your life. Her heart ached at his words. Ethan, my life hasn't felt like my own in years. For the first time with you, I feel like I can breathe. Like I'm alive. A flash of anguish crossed his face. He reached up and gently brushed away her tears with his thumb, his touch so tender it made her shiver. You deserve so much more than this, he said softly. More than stolen moments and secrets. But I don't want more, Emma said fiercely, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. I just want you. Ethan closed his eyes, fighting back his own tears. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm outside raged on, mirroring the turmoil inside their hearts. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely audible. If we do this, there's no going back. Emma's breath caught. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around his. Then let's not go back. Let's move forward. Together. Ethan opened his eyes and stared into hers, searching for any trace of doubt. There was none. Only love, raw and unshakable. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her forehead, lingering there as though drawing strength from her. You have no idea how much I love you, he murmured. Then show me, Emma whispered. Outside, the storm reached its peak, but inside the cabin, a fragile kind of peace settled over them. For the first time, they weren't running from their feelings. They were choosing to face them, no matter the cost. Little did they know someone had been watching. And their fragile world was about to come crashing down. The storm had quieted by dawn, leaving behind a heavy stillness that clung to the small cabin. The world outside glistened with rain-soaked leaves and muddy earth, but inside, Emma and Ethan lay side by side, their hands barely touching on the bedspread. Emma's eyes fluttered open first. For a moment, she didn't move. Just listened to the soft rhythm of Ethan's breathing, the fragile peace between them. It felt like a dream, one she wasn't ready to wake from. But reality crept in, sharp and cold. She turned her head to study him, her chest tightening with a mix of love and fear. His jaw was set even in sleep, as though he were fighting battles in his dreams. His hand twitched slightly, as if reaching for something he couldn't grasp. Emma wanted to smooth away the tension etched into his face, to tell him that they'd be okay. But a voice deep inside whispered that their problems were only beginning. She sat up quietly, wrapping herself in a thin blanket, and padded to the window. The forest beyond the cabin seemed ordinary, silent, calm. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A chill crawled up her spine, so strong it made her hug the blanket tighter. When she returned to the bed, Ethan stirred. His eyes opened slowly, heavy with sleep and shadows. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice rough. "Couldn't sleep," Emma admitted. She hesitated before adding, "Ethan, do you ever feel like someone's following us?" His gaze sharpened instantly, all traces of drowsiness gone. "Why? Did you see something?" Emma bit her lip. "Not exactly. It's just, last night before the storm got bad, I thought I saw a light moving through the trees. It was probably nothing, but—" Emma. Ethan sat up fully now, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His tone was calm but firm, the way it always was when he was trying to keep her from panicking. "If someone's out there, we'll deal with it. But you have to tell me the second you notice anything, okay?" She nodded, though unease still twisted in her gut. As Ethan dressed and stepped outside to check the area, Emma sank back onto the bed. She told herself she was imagining things, that the storm and the intensity of last night had messed with her mind. But deep in the shadows of the woods, a pair of eyes watched the cabin closely. An hour later, Ethan returned, his boots muddy, his expression unreadable. "Find anything?" Emma asked quickly. He hesitated before answering. "Tracks too big to be an animal." Someone was here. Emma's blood ran cold. "Oh my God. Hey. Ethan crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed gently across her cheeks, grounding her. "We don't know who it is or what they want. It could be a hiker or someone lost in the storm. But you don't believe that," she whispered, reading the truth in his eyes. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. She could feel his heartbeat pounding against her chest, fast and urgent. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you," he vowed. Emma clung to him, burying her face in his shoulder. His words should have comforted her, but they only made her more aware of the danger closing in around them. That evening, as darkness fell once again, Ethan set up an old lantern and checked the locks on the doors and windows. Emma sat curled up on the couch, watching him move with quiet precision. "You've done this before," she said softly. He paused, then gave a faint, humorless smile. "Yeah. A long time ago." "Ethan, who are you really hiding from?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he walked over and sat beside her, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting, tender touch. "Someone who doesn't forgive," he said finally. "And doesn't forget." Emma's breath caught. "Does this have to do with why you left town all those years ago?" Ethan turned to her, his expression raw. "Everything I've done, everything, has been to protect you." Before Emma could respond, a sound shattered the fragile stillness. A single, sharp crack echoed through the night. Ethan was on his feet instantly, his body tense, his eyes scanning the room. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "Ethan." "Emma, please." His gaze met hers, full of love and fear. "Trust me." As he slipped out into the darkness, Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run after him, to cling to him and never let go, but she stayed rooted in place. Through the thin walls of the cabin, she heard footsteps. Then a low, unfamiliar voice carried through the night air. And Emma realized, with bone-deep dread, that they were no longer alone. The sound of voices outside sliced through the night like a blade. Emma's breath caught, and she froze on the couch, straining to hear through the walls of the tiny cabin. One voice was Ethan's, low, steady, but tense in a way that made her stomach twist. The other voice was unfamiliar, harsh. It carried an edge of menace that set every nerve in her body on fire. She crept to the window, careful not to make the floorboards creak beneath her bare feet. Pushing the curtain aside just enough to see, she caught a glimpse of Ethan standing in the yard, his posture rigid, shoulders squared. Across from him stood a man in a dark jacket, his face partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. Even from a distance, Emma could feel the stranger's presence like a threat hanging in the air. The stranger gestured sharply, his movements quick and aggressive. Ethan didn't flinch. He said something Emma couldn't make out, his tone calm, measured, protective. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to burst outside, to stand beside Ethan, but a deep instinct told her to stay hidden. Suddenly, the stranger's voice rose, sharp and unmistakably angry. Emma couldn't hear the words, but the intent was clear. No, Ethan barked loud enough for her to catch. You're not coming near her. Her breath hitched. Her. They were talking about her. The stranger took a step forward. Emma saw Ethan's hand twitch at his side, as if fighting the urge to grab something. A weapon, maybe, or just to hold his ground. Then, just as abruptly, the stranger stopped. He said one final thing, his tone low and mocking, before turning and disappearing into the trees like a ghost. Ethan stayed frozen for a moment, watching the darkness swallow the manhole. When he finally turned back toward the cabin, Emma scrambled away from the window and sank onto the couch, trying to make it look like she hadn't been listening. The door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, water dripping from his jacket, his face pale and drawn. Ethan, Emma whispered, standing quickly. Who is that? What's going on? He closed the door and leaned against it, running a hand over his face. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet but laced with steel. Someone I thought I'd never see again. Emma's chest tightened. You know him? Yes. Ethan's jaw clenched. And he knows me. Which means, he trailed off, his eyes locking on hers, burning with intensity. Which means you're in danger now too. Emma felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Ethan, please, you have to tell me what's happening. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't keep living like this. Not knowing. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and took her hands, his grip firm but tender. Emma, listen to me, he said urgently. That man, he's part of the reason I left town all those years ago. There were things I got caught up in, things I never wanted you to know about. When I saw him tonight, I realized they've been watching me. Waiting. Emma's lips parted, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Waiting for what? Ethan swallowed hard, his throat working. For me to let my guard down. For me to have something, someone, they could use against me. His voice dropped to a whisper. And now they know about you. The room spun around Emma. Fear coiled in her stomach like a living thing. She gripped Ethan's hands tighter, grounding herself in his warmth. Then we'll leave, she said fiercely. We'll disappear, just like you did before. Start over somewhere no one can find us. For the first time that night, a flicker of hope crossed Ethan's face. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. It's not that simple, he said. They'll follow us. And if they catch us running, they'll know exactly what we mean to each other. That puts you in even more danger. Emma blinked back tears. Ethan, what are you saying? His expression softened, raw and aching. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the first tear that escaped. I'm saying I have to face this. Alone. No. The word ripped from Emma's throat. She grabbed his wrists, clinging to him desperately. You can't leave me like this. Not after everything. Ethan's eyes glistened, but his voice stayed steady. I would rather you hate me and be safe than love me and get hurt. Her knees went weak. She pressed her forehead to his chest, her sobs muffled against his shirt. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close one last time. You are my everything, he whispered into her hair. And that's exactly why I have to let you go. The storm outside had ended, but inside the cabin, the air felt heavier than ever, thick with grief, love, and the unbearable knowledge that something terrible was coming. Neither of them saw the faint glow of a cigarette tip in the darkness outside, or the shadow of the man who had never truly left. Morning came cloaked in a pale, gray mist, swallowing the forest in silence. Emma sat on the cabin's porch steps, hugging her knees to her chest. She hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red and swollen, her body aching from hours of crying. Each tear felt like a piece of her heart being stripped away. She stared at the muddy path leading away from the cabin, half expecting Ethan to come striding back through the mist with that reassuring smile of his, promising her everything would be okay. But the path remained empty. Inside, Ethan was moving quietly, his every action deliberate. Emma heard the faint sound of a drawer opening, the soft clink of metal, the rustle of a worn backpack being packed. The sound tore through her. He's really leaving. When Ethan finally stepped outside, the morning light revealed the dark circles beneath his eyes and the hard set of his jaw. He carried the old backpack slung over one shoulder, a sight that made Emma's stomach twist into knots. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling in front of her. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face. The touch was so tender it made her want to scream. "Don't," she whispered, flinching back. "Don't try to make this easier. It's not." Ethan's face crumpled with pain, but he didn't pull away. "I'm doing this to protect you. Last night proved they know where we are. If I stay, you'll never be safe." "Safe?" Emma's voice broke, raw and trembling. "You think I care about safe? I care about you. I care about us. You can't just disappear and expect me to go on like nothing happened." He swallowed hard, his throat working. "Emma, if you come with me, they'll use you against me. I can't fight them and protect you at the same time. This is the only way." "No," she shook her head violently, tears flying. "There has to be another way. We can leave together. We can hide." "They will find us," Ethan interrupted, his voice rising with desperate conviction. "You don't understand who they are. What they're capable of." Emma stared at him, her breathing ragged. She reached out and grabbed his shirt, clutching it in her fists like a lifeline. "Then stay. If you're going to die, let it be here with me. Don't leave me alone in this world." His own breath caught at her words. For a heartbeat, his resolve faltered, and he drew her into his arms, holding her as if he could fuse them into one. She felt the rapid thud of his heart against her cheek, the trembling in his chest as he whispered her name over and over. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Emma, you once told me that with me, you felt alive for the first time. That's why I have to go, so you stay alive." A broken sob tore from her throat. "I hate you," she choked out, though her hands refused to let go of him. "No, you don't," he said softly, pressing his forehead to hers. "And that's what terrifies me the most." By mid-morning, Ethan was gone. Emma sat at the table, staring blankly at the cold cup of coffee in front of her. The cabin felt unbearably empty without him. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow a reminder of his absence. She told herself he'd come back, that this was temporary, that love like theirs couldn't just vanish into the mist. But as the hours dragged on, a sick dread coiled tighter in her gut. When a knock came at the door, sharp and unexpected, Emma's heart leapt. She rushed to open it, hope surging, only to freeze. A man stood there, the same stranger from the night before. He smiled, slow and cruel. Well, look at you, all alone now." Emma stumbled back, her pulse spiking. "Where's Ethan?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. The man stepped inside uninvited, his presence filling the small cabin like a dark cloud. "That's what I came to talk to you about," he said smoothly. "You see, Ethan made a very poor choice when he left you here." Her chest tightened with fear. "What do you want from me?" He tilted his head, studying her like a predator. "Leverage." Emma's breath hitched. "You're his weakness," the man continued, circling slowly around her. "And Ethan, well, he's got something I want. Something I've been waiting a long time to get back." Emma's hands shook as she backed toward the kitchen counter, her fingers brushing against the wooden handle of a knife. The man noticed and chuckled darkly. Relax, sweetheart. I'm not here to hurt you. Not yet. His eyes glittered with menace. I just need you to deliver a message. Emma's voice trembled. What message? He leaned in close, so close she could feel his breath against her ear. Tell Ethan, he whispered, that if he doesn't come back with what's mine, you'll pay the price. Emma's vision blurred with tears. You're a monster. The man straightened, unfazed. Maybe. But monsters get what they want. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open. Emma collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with sobs. The mist outside seemed thicker now, pressing against the cabin like a living thing. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't wait for Ethan to come back. She couldn't sit here powerless, while danger closed in. Wiping her tears, Emma grabbed her coat and the old map Ethan kept in the drawer. If they wanted to use her as leverage, they'd have to catch her first. And this time, she wouldn't be the hunted. She would fight to bring Ethan home. Emma's boots sank into the wet earth with every step, the mud pulling at her like hands trying to hold her back. The mist had grown thicker, swallowing the narrow forest path ahead. It felt like walking into another world, a silent, haunted one where every shadow seemed alive. She clutched the old map tightly, though the faded ink was barely legible in the dim light. Ethan had marked certain places with faint X's over the years, safe houses, hideouts, routes he never explained. Emma had never asked before, but now those marks were the only thing guiding her through the woods. Her breath came in sharp, quick bursts, not just from the cold, but from fear. Fear for Ethan. Fear of the man who had come to the cabin. Leverage. The word echoed in her mind like a curse. Ethan had spent years keeping her safe, shielding her from the darkness of his past. Now, for the first time, she was stepping into that darkness willingly. She whispered to herself, a mantra to keep going. Find Ethan. Bring him back. Don't let them win. By mid-morning, the mist had thinned just enough for Emma to see a cluster of old hunting cabins up ahead. The roofs sagged under years of neglect, and moss clung to their walls. Ethan had once told her about this place, a forgotten settlement deep in the woods. If he was hiding, this was where he'd be. Emma crouched behind a fallen log, her heart hammering as she scanned the area. At first, it seemed deserted. Then movement caught her eye. A shadow shifted near one of the cabins. Emma's breath caught. She crept closer, careful to stay silent. When she rounded the corner of the cabin, her stomach dropped. It wasn't Ethan. It was him, the stranger. The man who had threatened her. He stood with his back to her, speaking into a small radio. His voice was low, but she caught enough to understand. She took the bait. Heading this way. Don't engage yet. I want her to see him first. Emma's blood turned to ice. It was a trap. She stumbled backward, but a branch snapped under her boot. The stranger spun around, his smile slow and menacing. Well, he drawled. Look who came running right on schedule. Emma bolted. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran. Branches whipped her face, tearing at her skin, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the stranger's footsteps pounded the earth, growing louder. Run all you want, sweetheart, he shouted. You'll only make it more fun when I catch you. Emma's lungs burned. Her vision blurred. She spotted a narrow ravine ahead and veered toward it, praying she could lose him. At the edge of the ravine, she slid down the steep embankment, landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself up and limped forward. Somewhere ahead, faintly through the trees, she heard another voice. Emma. Her heart leapt. Ethan. Ethan, she screamed, her voice breaking. I'm here. She pushed herself harder, crashing through the underbrush until she stumbled into a small clearing. There he was. Ethan. He stood in the middle of the clearing, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with shock. Emma, he gasped, rushing to her side. What are you? God, you're bleeding. He cupped her face with trembling hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears and dirt streaking her skin. You left, she sobbed, clinging to him. I couldn't just sit there. He came to the cabin, he said he'd hurt me if you didn't come back. Ethan's body went rigid. Rage flashed in his eyes. Where is he? As if on cue, The stranger's voice rang out from the trees. Right here. Ethan shoved Emma behind him, his stance protective, his body coiled like a spring. The stranger emerged from the shadows, calm and confident, as if he'd been in control all along. You never could resist her, could you, Ethan? He sneered. That's always been your weakness. Stay away from her, Ethan growled, his voice deadly quiet. The man chuckled. You don't get to make demands. You owe me. And now I'm here to collect. Emma's grip tightened on Ethan's sleeve. Ethan, please, she whispered. Let's just go. But Ethan didn't move. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the man before him. This ends tonight, Ethan said. The stranger tilted his head, amused. Oh, I agree. But not the way you think. From the trees, more figures appeared. Men Emma hadn't seen before, their faces hidden by hoods and masks. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Ethan. He stepped back, shielding her completely with his body. You brought friends, Ethan said coldly. The stranger's smile widened. And you brought her. Looks like we both came prepared. Emma realized then, with bone-deep dread, that she and Ethan were hopelessly outnumbered, and the man standing across from them wasn't here just to threaten them anymore. He was here to destroy everything. The clearing felt suffocatingly small, hemmed in by walls of trees and the looming figures of the men who'd emerged from the mist. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps, the icy air burning her lungs. There were 5 of them now, 5 shadows moving in slow, deliberate steps, each one closing the circle around her and Ethan. The stranger stood at the center like a king surveying his domain, his cruel smile illuminated by the pale light filtering through the fog. Ethan didn't flinch. His body remained between Emma and danger, his stance low and ready. Emma could feel the tension in him, like a coiled spring about to snap. Ethan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We can't fight them. He didn't look back at her. His voice was calm, steady, but she felt the tremor beneath it. I need you to trust me, Emma. No matter what happens. Her fingers clutched at the back of his jacket, desperate and trembling. I trust you. I always have. The stranger chuckled, the sound cold and cutting. How touching, he said. But trust won't save you now. What do you want? Ethan demanded, his tone sharp and controlled. The man's eyes glittered with a mix of amusement and malice. You already know. What you took from me all those years ago. The ledger, Ethan. Where is it? Emma frowned, confusion knitting her brow. Ledger? She didn't understand, but the word seemed to carry enormous weight. Ethan's shoulders stiffened, and she felt his breath catch. I destroyed it, Ethan said flatly. A long time ago. The man's smile faltered, then returned, colder than before. Liar. He stepped closer, and his men moved in sync, their boots crunching against the frozen earth. You've always been good at playing the hero, the stranger continued. Running off with her, pretending you could start over. But you forget, I know who you really are. I know what you did. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She looked up at Ethan, desperate for answers, but his face was carved from stone. The stranger's voice dropped, smooth and venomous. Bring me the ledger by sunrise, or his gaze shifted to Emma, lingering on her like a hand she couldn't shake off. I take her instead. No. Ethan surged forward, but 2 men blocked his path. The stranger laughed, tilting his head. There's the real Ethan. Always reckless when it comes to her. Ethan's chest heaved, rage rolling off him in waves. If you touch her, I swear. You'll what? The man interrupted smoothly. Kill me? You've had plenty of chances, and you never took them. That's the difference between us. You still think there are rules. Emma's heart pounded so violently it felt like it might burst. Ethan, please, she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Don't do this. Let's just go. But Ethan didn't move. His eyes never left the stranger. You're not taking her, he said, his voice low and deadly. You want me? Fine. But she walks away. The man smiled, slow and sinister. Oh, Ethan. That's not how this game works. He snapped his fingers. 2 men lunged forward and grabbed Emma. She screamed, thrashing against their grip, her nails scraping against rough fabric and skin. Ethan. The sound of her voice seemed to ignite something primal in Ethan. He moved like lightning, slamming his fist into one man's jaw, then twisting to elbow the other in the throat. Emma stumbled free, gasping, and Ethan caught her, spinning her behind him. "Run," he shouted. Emma hesitated, torn between fleeing and staying, but the look in Ethan's eyes, wild, desperate, pleading, made her legs move before her mind could catch up. She sprinted toward the trees, branches whipping at her face, her lungs burning. Behind her, chaos erupted, shouts, curses, the dull thud of fists meeting flesh. "Don't let her get away," the stranger roared. Emma didn't dare look back. She could hear footsteps crashing after her, closing the distance. Her ankles screamed in protest with every step, but she pushed harder, fueled by sheer terror. Just when her strength was about to give out, a strong hand seized her arm. "No," she cried, twisting wildly. "Emma, it's me." Ethan's voice cut through her panic like a lifeline. She turned to see him, battered and bleeding, but alive. His grip was firm, grounding her. "Come on," he panted, pulling her deeper into the forest. They ran until their breaths came in ragged gasps, and their legs nearly gave out. Finally, Ethan dragged her into a hollow beneath a fallen tree, crouching low as he covered her with his body. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "They'll pass us if we don't move." Emma clung to him, trembling, her face pressed against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, furious, rapid, alive. Above them, boots pounded past. Voices shouted, fading into the distance. When the forest finally fell silent again, Emma lifted her head. Tears streaked her dirt-stained cheeks. "Ethan," she choked out. "What was that? Who are these people?" Ethan's face was shadowed, his expression raw with guilt. "People I've been running from for years. And now they're done waiting." Emma cupped his face in her shaking hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Tell me the truth. All of it. No more secrets." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then, with a shuddering breath, he whispered the words that would change everything. "It's not just me they're after, Emma." His voice cracked. "It's you. You've been a part of this since the beginning. You just didn't know it." The words hung between them like frost in the air, sharp and chilling. Emma's body went rigid. "Me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Ethan, what are you saying?" I don't understand." Ethan swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. The dim moonlight filtering through the fallen tree's branches made his face look carved from stone. "You weren't supposed to," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you in the dark. But that man," his breath caught, fury flashing in his eyes. "He knows everything now. And he won't stop until he has you." Emma's hands trembled in her lap. The forest around them seemed to close in, the night air pressing heavy against her skin. Her voice was a whisper, fragile and small. "Safe from what, Ethan?" "From who?" He raked a hand through his tangled hair, his chest heaving. "From my past. From the people I used to work for." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. The pieces didn't fit, and yet deep inside, a part of her had always suspected there was more to Ethan than the quiet, guarded man who'd appeared in her life all those years ago. "What kind of people?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan hesitated. His silence was louder than any answer. "Ethan, please," she begged, clutching his arm. "If you want me to trust you, you have to tell me everything." His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. Finally, he spoke. "They weren't just criminals," he said, his tone flat and hollow. "They were an organization. Smuggling, extortion, blackmail, you name it. I was just a pawn at first, a kid with no family and no future. They gave me purpose. A name. A mission." Emma's breath caught, her mind spinning. "And the ledger?" "That ledger was proof," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Every deal, every payment, every life they destroyed. I stole it when I realized what they really were, and what they planned to do next." Emma's heart pounded, her throat dry. "And you destroyed it?" "Yes." His jaw clenched. "Or so I thought. But Ethan's voice faltered, trembling with rage. "He must believe I had a copy. He thinks you're the key to finding it. Emma blinked, bewildered. Me? But I don't even know any of this. Ethan cupped her face, his palms rough and warm against her frozen skin. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and desperate. Emma, listen to me, he said, his voice trembling. The night we ran all those years ago, it wasn't random. They were coming after me, and I took you with me because they knew who you were. Her lips parted, her breath catching. Who I was. Ethan nodded, his eyes shimmering with pain. Your father wasn't just some small-town mechanic, Emma. He used to work for them. He tried to get out, tried to protect you. That's why his voice cracked. That's why he died. Emma reeled backward as if struck. No, her voice shook violently. No, that's not true. My dad, he died in an accident. Ethan's expression twisted. Anguish etched into every line of his face. That's what they wanted you to believe, he whispered. Emma clutched her chest, struggling to breathe. The forest tilted, her world unraveling. Memories crashed over her, her father's sudden death, the hushed conversations her mother had late at night, the way Ethan had appeared in her life out of nowhere, always so protective, so secretive. Her tears fell fast and hot. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I could fix it, Ethan said hoarsely. I thought if I kept you hidden, if I kept us hidden, we could build a life away from all of this. But I was wrong. Emma stared at him through a blur of tears. And what about that night, she whispered. The night we got lost in the woods, years ago, when everything between us changed. Was that real, Ethan? Or was that part of the lie, too? Ethan's breath caught, his throat working. God, Emma, he rasped, his hands shaking as he reached for her. That was the only real thing I've ever had. I swear to you, on my life, it was real. Emma's sob broke free, raw and aching. She pressed her forehead to his, their tears mingling. For a moment, there was only them, their shared pain, their ragged breathing, their trembling hands clinging to each other as if letting go would shatter them both. Then through the night air, a sound cut through the silence. A sharp crack. The distant snap of a branch underfoot. Ethan stiffened instantly, his body going rigid. They found us, he hissed. Emma's fear surged anew, clawing at her chest. What do we do? Ethan grabbed her hand, his grip unyielding. We run. And this time, Emma, he said, his voice fierce and unrelenting, we don't stop until it's over. From the darkness behind them came a voice, smooth and mocking. You can't outrun the past, Ethan. Emma froze. She knew that voice. It was the stranger, the man who had haunted their every step. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. Stay behind me, he breathed. But the stranger's next words were aimed directly at Emma, cutting through the night like a knife. Or maybe, he purred, it's time she learned what really happened the night her father died. Emma's blood turned to ice. The man's words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the mist swirling around them. She felt Ethan tense beside her, his hand clamping around her so tightly it almost hurt. Don't listen to him, Ethan whispered, his breath hot and ragged against her ear. He's trying to break you. But Emma's heart was pounding too hard, her thoughts spiraling out of control. What does he mean, Ethan? She demanded, her voice trembling. What really happened to my father? The stranger stepped forward, his face finally illuminated by the pale sliver of moonlight. There was no more hiding behind the fog. His smirk was sharp, venomous, as if he'd been savoring this moment for years. Oh, Ethan didn't tell you, the man drawled, tilting his head like a snake preparing to strike. Of course he didn't. Because if he did, you'd never look at him the same way again. Shut up, Ethan snarled, taking a step in front of Emma. You don't get to use her against me. The man's cold laughter echoed through the trees. Oh, but she deserves to know. Don't you, Emma? His gaze slid to her, burning and cruel. She deserves to know that the boy she ran away with, the boy she trusted with her whole heart, is the very reason her father is dead. Emma staggered backward as if struck. No, she whispered. Her throat felt raw, her chest tightening painfully. He's lying. Tell me he's lying, Ethan. Ethan's silence was deafening. Emma's vision blurred with tears as she stared at him. Ethan, she begged, her voice breaking. Please. Say something. Ethan turned to her, his face pale, his jaw trembling. The truth was in his eyes before he ever spoke. I was there, Emma, he rasped, his voice hoarse with guilt. That night, your father tried to stop them. He tried to protect you, to get both of us out. But there was chaos, shouting, gunfire. He broke off, his breath shuddering. Emma shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, no, no. I didn't pull the trigger, Ethan said desperately, stepping closer. But I didn't stop it either. I froze. And when he fell, Ethan's voice cracked, shattering like glass. I ran. I ran with you, because it's what he begged me to do in his last breath. The memory hit Emma like a blow. The hurried whisper of her father's voice, the way Ethan had dragged her through the darkness that night, the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat as they fled. All these years, she'd believed they were just running from nameless danger. But it had always been this. This moment. This truth. You knew, she whispered, her voice hollow. All this time, you knew what really happened to him. Ethan dropped to his knees before her, his hands reaching for hers. Yes, he choked out. And I hated myself for it every single day. I thought if I could protect you, if I could keep you safe, maybe I could make up for what I let happen. Emma's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her world was breaking apart piece by piece, leaving only jagged edges. The stranger's laugh sliced through the night. Touching, he sneered. But it changes nothing. She'll never forgive you, Ethan. And when she leaves you, when she finally sees you for the coward you are, she'll come to me willingly. Ethan surged to his feet, fury blazing in his eyes. You'll never have her, he spat. The man drew a knife, its blade glinting wickedly. Then you'll die trying to stop me. Before Emma could scream, they clashed. The fight was brutal and fast, a blur of fists and steel in the moonlight. Ethan moved with desperate strength, his every strike fueled by love and regret. Ethan! Emma cried, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The man lunged, driving the knife toward Ethan's chest. Ethan twisted at the last second, grabbing the man's wrist and wrenching it backward. There was a sickening crack, a howl of rage, and then the blade clattered to the ground. With a final bone-jarring blow, Ethan sent the man sprawling into the dirt. He didn't move again. For a moment, the only sound was Ethan's ragged breathing and Emma's soft sobs. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stumbled to her, his face bloodied, his body trembling. It's over, he gasped. You're safe now. Emma flinched when he reached for her. Her eyes were wide, shimmering with both love and devastation. Safe, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. How can I ever feel safe again, Ethan, when the person I trusted most has been lying to me my entire life? Ethan's hands dropped to his sides, his shoulders collapsing. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Emma, everything I did, every lie I told, was to keep you alive. A sob tore from her throat. She wanted to run, to scream, to hate him. But when she looked at him, battered, broken, his eyes filled with nothing but love, she couldn't move. The memory of their shared past surged between them. The first stolen glance, the night in the woods years ago when everything had changed, the way he'd always been her safe place even when the world burned around them. Slowly, Emma stepped forward. Her trembling hand brushed his cheek, tender and aching. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, tears streaming freely. But I can't let you go either. Ethan closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his face. Then let me stay by your side, he murmured. Even if all you feel for me is hate. Even if it takes a lifetime to make things right. Emma leaned her forehead against his, their breaths mingling. Her heart ached, but for the first time, it beat with something other than fear. From somewhere deep in the forest, the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees. Emma tightened her grip on Ethan's hand. We walk out of here together, she said softly. And when we do, we decide who we become. No more running. No more lies. Ethan nodded, his voice a whisper of hope. Together, as they limped toward the rising sun, Emma turned back for one last glance at the clearing where her past had shattered and where her future had begun. Behind them lay a lifetime of pain and secrets. Ahead of them stretched a road uncertain and fragile, but theirs to claim. And in that moment, as the first rays of light touched their faces, Emma finally understood. Survival wasn't just about escaping the darkness. It was about choosing to step into the light.